All right. So the name of my project is The Big Family Search. And as I said earlier, it is a descendant reunification project. And I'm just so super excited about that because I'm actually finding my family that was separated by slavery in the antebellum South. There's been a lot of really great research around the transatlantic slave trade, and that's really important history. But it's also important for me to share about the particular era of the antebellum era because so many of our members of our families spent their entire lives enslaved in the antebellum era. And it's just, again, a really important part of American history. And I wanted to share about that experience and their humanity. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And this will be interactive. So I'm going to be asking you all to participate in some parts of this presentation, and then we'll have a question and answer session. I know we spent a lot of time in the introductions earlier, so I'm going to try to move through this very quickly. So this is my story. So this is the favorite picture of me that I think I'll ever have. This is like a 6 or 7-year-old Pamela in South Carolina, which is where my family is from and where I was raised. And so I've always sort of lived in the area where my family had been enslaved, or what I thought the area was, that they had been enslaved. And so I grew up very close to my history. And I had parents who were very purposeful in telling me about this family history as much as they knew. So of course, they didn't have the luxury of having, the online resources, genealogy research. They had family stories and they had family music, both of which I'm going to share a little bit with you today. But it was enough to sort of pique my interest. And then probably as it was with many of you, just one day that light bulb just sort of came on and my interest just shot, over the moon. And I sort of got addicted to this genealogy research. And I'm really excited about that. So this is my story. This is how it started. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, Mullins, South Carolina, and it's in what's called the PD region of the state. And if you don't know much about South Carolina, it's also where Myrtle Beach is included. My hometown's about 45 minutes from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And so I just, again, knew a good bit about my history. But something changed when I went to college at South Carolina State University, which is a historically Black college. And so it's considered an HBCU. And I had several instructors who were from various countries in Africa. And so at some point in each of those classes that I attended in my business program, they would ask me, "What country are you from?" And I thought, well, I've never been asked that question coming from all in South Carolina. It was really kind of strange to me. But over the last 30 plus years, including here in Texas for the last 12, I get asked on a regular basis, "What country are you from?" And so I explained to people that not only am I from the US, that my family was here even before we were a country. So my family has been here for hundreds of years, and I've been able to document that information. So I decided in 2017 I wanted to take a DNA test because I wanted to know, where I'm from or where my family comes from. I knew, of course, from the continent of Africa and also in Europe, but I just didn't know anything more specifically. So the most amazing thing is when I took the DNA test, all the places that people actually thought that I was from showed up in my DNA test. And so primarily Nigeria and the Congo, Benin, Togo, but some of the other places that I find my family, I'm Native, which is Native American, but also Mexican Native, which was a shocker to me. I didn't expect that. And then Scotland and Norway and Sweden. So I'm not sure. I'm sorry, did someone say something? You have a question? Okay, so I was surprised to find, my family in all those places. And so it's just been an amazing journey. The other thing that shocked me was almost immediately after I got the DNA results, I started connecting at first to hundreds and hundreds of people. Within the first couple of days, maybe 350 people, I knew one person. And then shortly thereafter, another 300 and some people. And by the time I hit 1,000, I may have only known about 5 people. So then I became very curious and wanted to know, how is this possible that I'm related to all these people, literally from South Carolina to California and all the places in between, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. And I had never heard anything about my family living in these places. So what I decided to do was to, first of all, reach out to scholars. And so I literally started talking with people and asking the questions, people who had written about forced migration of enslaved people, specifically during the antebellum era. And then I started reading lots and lots of history books because since my family has been here for so long, I found that we were connected to lots of different places and spaces in history. We were connected to the Revolutionary War. We were connected to, we were enslaved, in fact, by some of the revolutionists, some people who were governors and very prominent in history. And so it allowed me to sort of start tracing the footsteps of my family and understanding a little bit more about that history. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, but I want to first show you the next impetus for me to try to find my family. This woman is Laura Atkinson Campbell Singletary, and she is my great-great-grandmother. And I had heard stories from my Aunt Lucy May my entire life about this woman. And I never even imagined that I would ever see her face or know what she looked like. But then when I started the Big Family Search, someone that I still to this day have never met in California, who also shares my history, sent me this picture. And here's the thing that's most amazing to me. Not only did I not think that I would ever see her, I didn't imagine that I would have some of her features. So when I look at my forehead and I look at my nose, and even the shape of my lips. Now, I have an auntie, my father's sister, who is stuck right in the middle. Like she looks so much like my great-great-grandmother Laura, who was born about 1840 or so. Between 1838 and 1840 is our best guess, and she lived to be 94 years old. She outlived 2 husbands, had 9 children, and of course, lots of great-grandchildren. Now, on the right on this slide, after I started the Big Family Search, and I decided this is something that I have to do because Laura could not ever have imagined seeing her family be reunited. And I say that because it wasn't until I started doing the research, and I've been doing my family's genealogy research now for about 12 years, but within the last few years when I started this project, I was able to find her death certificate. And her death certificate says that she was born in North Carolina. So that's the first time that I realized that even she had been forcibly migrated, like 2.5 million other African Americans during the antebellum era, away from her family, away from her home, down into South Carolina, where she lived out the rest of her days. So everyone that you see in that picture on the right-hand side, on the far right, is a picture of my brother. But all the other people are people, and that's me in the middle, are people that I met during a visit to North Carolina, and they are all her great-great-great-grandchildren. So that's Laura's family. All right, next, I want to talk about Texas specifically and these Texas ties. And why it's important for me to share this information. Of course, I live here in Texas, but Texas is very important to this history. The first thing to know is that Texas was the last bastion of slavery. So it was the last state that actually allowed legalized slavery in this country. Now, prior to Texas becoming a state, there were enslaved people here, but very small number, around 5,000 or so people that were living here as enslaved people in Texas. And then so Texas, once it became a state, did something very similar to what was done during the very foundation of this country when people were traveling from Europe over to the US. And they established something that was very similar to head rights. Because the US government, as the country grew southerly and westerly, they wanted to establish this land as quickly as possible. So at the end of the Mexican-American War, there was a huge body of land that they wanted to have populated. So one of the things that they did was to give slaveholders land. And so for every enslaved person that you brought to this territory, that you brought to the state of Texas, you would receive 80 acres of land. And so that's how a lot of families either developed their wealth here in Texas, or if they were coming from the East Coast, or from Alabama, Mississippi, or Louisiana, and they already had plantations, they were able to continue to grow their wealth and establish their families all across the U.S. And so you're going to, hear familiar names that, are very much from South Carolina, like Rotan, Texas. Rotan is actually named for a South Carolina family. The Young family in Texas come from South Carolina. There used to be a Sumter County in Texas, and that, it's defunct right now. But again, it had also a South Carolina connection. The Campbell family is here in Texas. The DeWitts are the same DeWitts that come from South Carolina. So we are very connected in this history. And then there was a thing called refugeeing. So when the Civil War was imminent, for those folks that are living in all the places that I named previously, wanted to make sure that they were able to maintain their family's wealth. They wanted to maintain their rights to own enslaved people. And so they marched people across the country here to Texas, where they were allowed to do that. And so that term is called refugeeing, and it was a very common thing. So by 1845, there were about 20,000 enslaved people living in the state of Texas. And between 1845 and 1860, that number grew to 180,000 people that were living here as enslaved people in Texas. Now, when I am teaching workshops, which I like to do all over the country, but also I've done here in Texas, these are pictures from about a year ago, where I did some workshops in the freedmen's communities that still exist here in the Dallas area. And so a lot of people will come to these workshops and they want to learn, but they don't even know how much of this history they actually carry with them. So I'm going to ask you, if you all don't mind participating with me really quickly, I'm going to ask you for just a show of hands if you're familiar with some of the terminology that comes from other places that have found their way to Texas. So is anyone familiar with the term knee baby? Have you ever heard that term, knee baby? If you can, if you're on your screen, if you'll raise your hand. So what the knee baby is, it's a term that comes from Africa, but specifically from the Carolinas. You're going to find this term used to mean the child that's next to the youngest child when there's at least 3 children in the family. So in my family, I'm the knee baby, which means that I technically would be the child that would be bouncing on the mother's knee while she is expecting the next child. So because we were agrarian families, and they were very large families, you would find that there would be lots of children, but that child that's next to the youngest is referred to as the knee baby. Another term that you might hear is the boogeyman. The boogeyman is also from a West African term, and it's one of those things where my mother would tell us stories. When we wanted to hear something scary, she would share stories about the boogeyman. What about the expression, great day in the morning? Also a term that comes from this history from enslaved people. And then one that is one of my favorites that my remaining auntie, my mother's youngest sister, still uses, and I hear in the community a lot, is God Almighty knows. And what they're saying is God Almighty knows. But let me tell you, especially when it's a comical, a funny story that they're telling, and they throw in that God Almighty knows, it really enhances the storytelling. So these are things that you may hear within the communities here in Texas. And these are things that let you know that this language is not just Texas language, but it has come from other places. Now, before I move on to this next slide, I want to talk with you a little bit about the music that lets you know how you're connected to Texas. And again, I'm going to ask you for a show of hands if you've ever heard these songs. And I'm going to sing a little bit for you. The first song says, Walk with me, Lord, walk with me. Walk with me, Lord, walk with me. While I'm on my tedious journey, I want Jesus to walk with me. Now, if you've heard that song, you may not have realized it literally is a song about this experience. Walk with me, Lord, is talking about me having to leave where my family is from and walk to a place where I don't know what to expect. I don't know what's going to happen. And it's a song of this specific migration. There's another song you may have heard that says, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Oh, sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home. Now, the next time you hear that song, it may make you think about the fact that these are literal experiences that people are talking about, that there may be young people who have been sold away from parents, and they understand that they may never see their mother ever again. And so these are songs that have come through the migration. And here's one probably everybody knows and may not have realized because it's been recorded for so long by so many artists that it was a song of this experience. And that song is Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya. Oh, Lord, Kumbaya. Now, I know the song is generally seen as, sort of this happy, let's get together, as they like to say, let's have a come to Jesus moment and have a peaceable moment. But that's not what Kumbaya actually means. Kumbaya is a song that would have been sung on the plantation. And my family has been singing this song for generations after generations after generations. And it's typically a time when there was going to be a sale of enslaved people. Or let's say if there was someone who had been an enslaver who passed away and they were going to be splitting up the inheritance, that inheritance would have included African American people. And so Kumbaya is a song of mourning. And that song is literally saying, using the Gullah Geechee language, which is popular along the seacoast islands in South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. It is saying, come by here, my Lord, come by here. But some of the other verses in the song says, somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord. So this is a song about sorrow and despair. And it is a literal crying out to the Lord, saying, I need you in a way that I've never needed you before because I cannot comprehend this kind of hurt, this kind of pain because my family is being separated. So even if you've heard some of these songs or these expressions, you have been exposed to this history around forced migration of African American people during the antebellum era. So now I want to talk about some of the tools that have been used to find my family. And I am so happy to report that I've been able to find my family all over this country, here in Texas even, and actually all over the world, including Germany and Canada. And I'm going to share a little bit about that. So one of the things I've been able to use is social media. So I'm going to tell you this first story. I want to share that the gentleman under the picture that says social media on the left side is my brother. On the right side is a gentleman that was on Facebook. And so my brother received, a message, a direct message from some of his friends that said, you got to meet this, you got to know this guy, like he looks just like you, and he's got the same last surname. And so I received the picture from my brother, and because we talk all the time, very close-knit family, and I sort of jokingly said to him, because I didn't know, like, why are you sending me a picture of yourself? I know what you look like. And he says to me, Pamela, that is not me. So since I started this big family search, I have become so emboldened. Like, I am going to reach out to you. I have no fear as far as this is concerned. So I found this gentleman on social media and I asked him if we could have a conversation. I ended up interviewing him for my Big Family Search podcast to find out a little bit more about his history, which he didn't know a whole lot about. But long story short, our families were forcibly migrated within the state of South Carolina, which is common. So again, more than 2.5 million people were forcibly migrated during this antebellum era. About 875,000 of those people were migrated across state lines, but the other 1.5 million or more people were forcibly migrated within their own states. But here's the thing. If you live in a state where you were forcibly migrated, 100, 300 miles away from your family during the antebellum era, and, so many of the areas were populated by slaveholders, then there was a chance that once your family was separated, you were never going to have the freedom just to go back and see your family because you had never left the plantation prior to your enslavement. And I say plantations, but farms as well, because the overwhelming majority of enslaved people were owned by people who owned less than 5 enslaved people, or who, held them in bondage, I would say. And so it wasn't a chance that you would return to your family. So they were migrated from the PD area, which is near the Myrtle Beach area, in the lower east part of the state, all the way to the upper part of the state. And so eventually around the mid-1800s, this family, both Black and white Campbell family, migrated into North Carolina. And so our families were separated since the 1800s. And so us discovering each other in Facebook sort of brought these families back together again. Now, the second picture was discovered through DNA. This person that's in the photo with me, I met her down in Florida. I went to Florida to meet my family. And this person I discovered through using DNA. So a really interesting story. We had taken 2 different DNA tests, and I had heard about a website, a free website called GEDmatch. That's GED Match. And it allows people to upload raw data from various tests and to match across those tests. It was created by a university, and I think it's still free to use, but a company has since bought this site. But it uses autosomal DNA to make these matches. So she is an author who has written a book about her childhood spent with her parents and in Alabama. She was dropped off from her family in Michigan to grandparents that she'd never even met before when she was 4 years old. And the book is called The Quilt of Souls. And I was so intrigued by this book. And I, know as an author myself, that when you publish, anything, you grab up all the tools of social media, website, all those things that are related to the title of your book to avoid any confusion when it's time for your book to be published. So when I went into GEDmatch, I saw that someone who had taken a test and the the email address was at quiltofsouls.com, was a match to me. And I thought someone who's taken a test has got to be related to her, or at least they're using her email information. So I reached out to her. I had started following her years earlier, had never had a conversation with her, but I thought, I'm just going to see if she'll respond. And I said in the email, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, I'm not a crazy lady, but I think I'm related to you. And so she responded by saying, I don't think that we're family. Her family has firmly established their genealogy in Alabama, in Livingston County in Alabama, and Campbell County, Alabama. And so she said, so a friend of mine from South Carolina, or has South Carolina roots, used my email address. It's probably her. But if you'll send me the identifying information, I will be able to tell you if we are related or not. So I did that. And she was heading to California to actually spend some time with that friend. So a couple of hours later, when she lands her plane, my phone is on my nightstand and it's just lighting up. I'm getting all these messages. And the message is, Pamela, you are related to my mother. And she said, I never knew about any South Carolina history. So I don't know how we're related, but she told me about her great-great-grandfather, whose name is Josh Horn, who was living in Alabama. And Josh was a very well-known storyteller. He shows up in lots of books about this history. And in his interview for the Federal Writers Project in the 1930s, the interviewer asked him if he remembered his mother and his father. And he says, of course I do. His father shared his name. Now, I don't know if I shared earlier, but my brother's name is Craig Campbell, and my maiden name is Campbell, and we're the Campbells of South Carolina. But in this interview from the 1930s, Josh shared that his mother was Anne Campbell. So at some point, Phyllis's family, who is also my family, had been together along this migration journey, and it showed up in the Alabama DNA. And again, I do happen to know that the Campbell family, who were slaveholders in South Carolina, also came to Texas. And so this final, go back one, this final connection is one that I found purely through genealogy research. So my family are also Geralds, and I found my Gerald family here in Texas. As a matter of fact, one of the slaveholder Gerald descendants, she and I have communicated through email, and she has lived in Texas now for over 45 years. And so I do have family here. We are connected through DNA that are Geralds. So this gentleman is an opera singer who lives in Germany and has been a professional performer for 21 years. And he is originally from North Carolina. So I am finding my family in two counties that share the same name, because the PD region of South Carolina is right next door to the North Carolina border. So my Gerald family, both Black and white, travel between the two states. And so I actually contacted him because I thought I was related to my father's Lawrence side of the family. And when he met me, we, did a Zoom call, and he said, "Oh my goodness, you look a lot like my mother." And, it just turns out that I'm related to him on both my mother's side of the family from Horry County, South Carolina, and my father's family from Clarendon County, South Carolina. And so we come from a long line of musicians and performers. I just learned last year that my mother had recorded, along with her sisters and brothers, an album when she was in her 20s. And she taught my whole family how to sing. So I don't know how she didn't share that information with us, but I'm excited about that because I am also a singer and a performer, and I share a lot of this history through music. And again, with almost every single person that I've met through the Big Family Search, as a result of my searching for my family, who comes from this side of the family, they are skilled in the fine arts. They are musicians, they are architects and builders, they are writers. They, again, are just very gifted family, and particularly musically, they're gifted. And so my own children, my youngest is a senior at Southern Methodist University. She is an amazing 125-pound tuba player. And her goal is by the end of this year, she will be teaching music. And she plays several other instruments as well as singing. And then I have a son who is also a musician who performs with me, records with me, but he also graduated from Southern Methodist University as a fine artist, which again is common in my Gerald family. But he also graduated from Yale University with his Master's of Fine Arts. And again, I found out since I started doing this search that I have at least 3 other relatives, and I never knew this, who graduated from Yale. So again, amazing family history that I've been able to use these tools to find my family. Now, a couple of quick little stories that are very specific to Texas, and hopefully these will excite you as much as they excite me. So the DART and DNA. So I say now, I've been doing this for so long that I feel like I have a sixth sense about these kinds of things. So I live in North Dallas, and I commute into Dallas for work on the DART. At least I was before the pandemic. And I saw a man get on the train one morning, and I said, gosh, he looks familiar. And so my first thought, because I don't have any family here, I relocated here with just my children and my husband about 12 years ago. I don't have any other family that I knew about here. I thought maybe he looks like a colleague. I work at a university in Dallas, and I thought he reminds me of someone. And I thought if I ever get an opportunity to talk to this guy, I'm going to ask him if he's related to this professor, who's also a medical doctor who works at Southern Methodist University, where I'm also employed. And so I thought, I don't know if that's going to happen because the trains are always very crowded in the morning. Well, one day when I'm returning from work, the train is crowded and I'm standing at the front of the train, and at the next stop, this guy gets on the train. And so again, here I am, fearless Pamela. I hand him my card and say, I have this family reunification project that's called the Big Family Search, and I'm trying to find my family that was separated by slavery. And I say to him, you remind me so much of this gentleman that I work with, one of my colleagues, and I'm wondering if you know him. So I give him the guy's name. He goes, no, I'm not familiar with that name at all. And so as I'm talking to him, I'm looking at his mannerisms, how he moves his head, how his body moves, and even the shape of his face. And I'm like, he actually reminds me a lot of my brother and my cousins, my maternal cousins. So I say to him, are you a Dallasite? Like, are you from here? And the gentleman says, no, I'm from South Carolina. And so I say, what part of South Carolina are you from? And he says, he's from Andrews, South Carolina. And I say to him, well, I don't know that I have any family living in Andrews. I also am from South Carolina. But when I started doing this DNA research, I realized that my ancestral family was also enslaved in Andrews. And so he tells me he hasn't done the DNA test, but I ask him for his name. It's an unusual name that until that day I'd never heard before. So I say to him, I've got my app on my phone. Do you mind if I put your last name into my app and to see if anybody comes up that shares your last name, because you really remind me of my family? And he says, well, I'm not in there, but sure. And I say, well, I don't know if anybody pops up where they're going to be from, but they'll be somewhere in the world, and there's a chance that they could be my family and they could be your family. So in just a matter of seconds, I put his last name into my app on my phone. I was using the Ancestry DNA app, and lo and behold, 2 people come up that actually have his last name. And I say, well, here are 2 people. And he says, well, can I see your phone? And it was a young man and a young woman. And he says, I don't know who that young man is, but the young woman is my daughter. And so that's just how closely tied together we are in this history. And the next story I'm going to share is the late day lecture. So there was a lecture that I was attending. At the last minute, I decided to go in the evening. It was a really rainy, cold day. And this again happened last year, right before the pandemic started. And so Eric Foner, who is one of the most preeminent lecturers on slavery history, was going to be speaking. And I thought, I can't pass up this opportunity. So it was an amazing lecture, as you can imagine. But at the end of this lecture, I got an opportunity to ask him a question. And so I started by prefacing my question with, I'm from South Carolina, and this history that you're talking about, especially as it relates to slavery and Reconstruction, is my family's history. And so I went on to ask my question. It was very well received. He gave me an amazing answer. So after the lecture was over, several people who knew me from doing community lectures in the Dallas area came over to talk to me. And so I saw this one man lingering, and he came over to talk to me as well, and very nice gentleman. And he sat down, he asked if I had a moment to talk with him. So he started sharing a little bit about finding out as an adult that his family had been slaveholders. And he says they had been slaveholders in South Carolina. And he says it's from a place that you probably never heard of. It's Clarendon County, South Carolina. And now he has only ever lived in Texas, in Rotan, Texas is where he's from. And his mother had given him a small metal box, and he was moving from Rotan to the Dallas area to start his law practice. And so weeks or months later, when he opened the box, is when he found documentation from his family who had enslaved people in South Carolina. So I thought, this is great information. I belong to several online genealogy groups in South Carolina. And so I'm going to reach out to see if there's anybody who knows anything about these two families that were very wealthy plantation holders, both in North and South Carolina, that this man was connected to. So as I started looking back over my own documents, I realized that my great-grandmother, who I remember, she passed away when I was 7, her name was Ella Prince Rames Davis. Ella's mother had the same name as his ancestral family. She had been born in 1845 and had been enslaved by his family, as well as her parents. The name was McFadden, so the McFaddens and the Montgomerys. And so I have since found many of my McFadden and Montgomery family members that had been enslaved by this gentleman's family, who has only known his Texas family, who were not slaveholders, as far as he knows in Texas. But we are finding family that were forcibly migrated from South Carolina to Alabama, and then possibly to Louisiana, and even here in Texas. So he and I have formed a really amazing friendship, and he is going to be sharing as much information as he can about his family, so that African Americans who share this history, and he's found African Americans that he is related to. I asked him to do his DNA test. He did that. And so, we're finding all of these connections, even with other families, the Rames family, the Prince family. So several families that I have that are African American from Clarendon County. He also has as European American families in this country. So we're making those connections. So those are some amazing Texas stories that I've had great success with. So we only have a little bit of time left, but I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see the documentary trailer. So I'm going to show you just a few minutes of that trailer. This is sort of the crown jewel of my Big Family Search project. I started making this project before the pandemic. We got a little bit sidelined, and I'm in the process of finishing that film now that is going to also touch on some of this Texas history. So bear with me, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the trailer for the documentary project. Black people have always been central to American history. I was never taught much of anything about the contributions of Black people in this country, even slavery history. In 2017, I actually came to this and I realized I got thousands and thousands of people that are related to DNA. And I really went in this week. I started doing research into the schools, and finding out our first migration.
I can't hear it.
Oh. Here in the US. These families were separated and were never back together. The people who are walking around have no idea they will ever connect to each other. Can anyone else hear?
No, the audio isn't very audible. It's kind
okay.
of
I'm sorry about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link for you into the chat. And what that will allow you to do is to, when you get a moment, if you would, just take a moment and just take a look at it. I do apologize for that. Let's see here. I'm going to do that for you. Bear with me one second.
no worries at all. That way we get to hear more from you.
Okay, thank you.
And we can watch that later.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yes. This is my pleasure. I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to share. Okay. All right, let me just come out of here and get back into the presentation. Let me go into, let's see. I don't know if it's gonna, I don't see a chat in here, but I'm gonna make sure everybody gets this, okay? Okay. All right. So let me come out of this and get back into my Zoom, into the rest of what I'm gonna show you. Okay, just bear with me. I'm so blessed to have 20 somethings who typically can help me with this kind of stuff. Let's get rid of this. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about what you can do. So here's what's really important to understand, that this is really shared history. This is shared American history. And it is history that is still negated. This particular history about the forced migration of, again, and separation, family separations of more than 2.5 million people who were born in this country. And so the last time there has been any concerted effort by the US government to reunite these families was in 1872. And that's through the Freedmen's Bureau, who actually prided themselves, whenever possible, they would try to reunite families. And this was not a very easy thing to do. And that's because sometimes people, enslaved people, had been sold or traded or, moved away from their families 3, 4, 5 times within their lifetimes and before emancipation. And so sometimes it was hard to make those connections. But one of the things that inspired this film project for me is that I was able to find on a website called Last Seen, there are ads that were placed by emancipated people. And immediately at the end of the Civil War, they set out to try to find their families. And you're going to find that this is indexed by state. So you can go to lastseen.org and you're going to find lots of ads from people in Texas who are literally placing ads in Black-owned newspapers in 1865 and beyond. And their recollection for where they last saw their family is amazing. So some of the ads will read, I am from South Carolina, but my mother was was sold to a family in Missouri. And, that family's name was. And if you have any information that can help me get to my family. And there's even a story of a gentleman who was living in Texas who was said to have walked back to South Carolina to reunite with his family. But again, in 1872, the federal government, who a lot of the congressmen at that time had been former slaveholders and had made the decision that they did not want to provide any more funding for this kind of assistance to help families be reunited, they shut down the Freedmen's Bureau. And so again, a lot of these connections have been lost to our families. And so that, knowing about, these information wanted ads, all the things that people went through to try to find their mothers and fathers and their siblings and their children, it really touched my heart. And I thought, I've got so much technology, so many things that are available to me that was not available to them. So then it became my mission to try to find my family. So again, someone asked me this question on Facebook recently, like, is it important as a European American that we try to do this research? And I say yes, because almost everywhere that I've been able to find family that migrated from the Carolinas to various states, I have been able to find my family. So as much as you can share about your family with African American families, and there are lots of African American groups that are online, even in the state of Texas, please do that. And so one of the things that we're trying to also create as a part of the Big Family Search Project are spaces where this kind of information and stories can be shared. And hopefully I'll be able to share more about that with you at another time. So that is the Big Family Search. That's what I'm doing to sort of do my work, as I call it, kingdom work in this part of the vineyard, where I'm trying to find and reunite families. And again, I found family so far all over Texas, because a lot of the families that are here, that have been here for 7, 8 generations, have come from all the places where my family had been enslaved. But I'm finding family down in Houston, in Dallas, all over East Texas, And it's pretty amazing. And so that's the Big Family Search. So I just want to leave a little space now to see if you have any questions for me.
I have so many questions, but I am happy to wait till the very end and let everybody ask you, because I'm like in tears. So I'm just going to hang on and let everybody ask.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Have you discovered the book, Books? It's a series of three, I believe it's narratives of formerly enslaved people, 1938, 1939.
Oh, yes. I have discovered them. I read them for all the different states. And that's been one of the resources for me actually finding my family. So the amount of information, the wealth of information that people have been able to share about where their families were, their families' experiences, has led me to a lot of these reunifications. And so, yes, for Texas as well, some amazing things I
Yeah.
found. Mhm.
Good stories there.
Oh, excellent.
We're trying to
story.
work on a local cemetery here, Mosier Valley,
Yes,
and get some things going there. So,
that's fantastic. I appreciate your work. I really do.
well, you've given us some good hints too on how to do
Oh,
things.
good.
Thank you.
Good, good. That's amazing. And I would love to continue to know how that is progressing, because I'm going to be continuing to film and traveling around Texas in the next few months, and maybe it's one of the visits on the way. Are there any other questions? You can go ahead and ask. I think I can see everyone, but make sure you unmute yourself and feel free to ask your questions.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
I just started this from reading Roots Tech,
Mm-hmm.
and doing my DNA, I have discovered people who are totally European. I'm African American,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm connected to people who are totally European, have no African ancestry.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I was able to trace this one family, and I've come up with several names. I determined that this person's on my father's side and my father's mother's side. And what I'm trying to do now, I just started this yesterday, is
Mhm.
find the common ancestor. And I guess I'm overwhelmed at what to do. I've been able to isolate the people, but I don't know the common ancestor. I was intrigued because one of the people who was born in 1921 had, what do you call those, CMs, had a high number of CMs
Uh-huh. Oh,
that
yeah.
was equivalent to people, that I know, relatives that I know. And
Mhm.
I was just intrigued how, why that was so high.
Okay. Okay. Well, I will say, because they are definitely your family. So I've had a lot of, and maybe my experience is unusual, but I've had a lot of really good luck in this area. Now, one of the things that helped me is that I also had my brother to do the DNA. Now, we are full siblings, same mother, same father, but our
Mhm.
DNA is slightly different. So I look just like my dad's family. I look just like his sisters.
Mhm.
And my mother would probably tell you, even on her days when she's upset with me, you act just like your daddy, right? So I was always, that daddy's girl, and prided myself, and still do. He's not with us anymore, but I pride myself on that. But what was really interesting when I did my DNA is that I found that my DNA skews mostly to my mother's family. So
Oh.
when my brother did his DNA, he has German, he has England, he has places in his DNA that I don't have. So my DNA skews more to Sweden and France and Scotland, which is more my mother's family.
Mhm.
So everybody, even in Canada, that I found that has that Sweden and France, I almost always know that it's going to be somebody that I'm related to on my mother's side. Now, when I did my research, because I not only did I talk to scholars, I went back and started reading the history books from the regions that I'm from the PD region, from my county. And those old history books from the early 1900s tell a lot of the stories, especially about the founding families. So I found out that, you know, I've got family who are DeWitt, who came from Germany, the Vareens, who I believe were French Huguenots. And so those places that are in the history books that describe where the family's from shows up in my DNA. So that is one of the tools that I'm able to use to sort of distinguish which family, my mother's family, my father's family, which sometimes I found family who are on both sides. We share a lot of DNA from both my mom and my dad, even though my parents were not related. But so when I reach out to people and I ask them, you know, about their families and this particular part of the family, if they know, especially if they are Varese, if they are DeWitt, you know, if they share this history, they're able to sort of add to what I already know. So I'm going to encourage you, like I said, Black and white, to reach out to these to people. And what you're going to find, again, this history is not that far away. People are surprised to find out that my grandmother's father was born enslaved. My grandfather's father was born enslaved. So one of the reasons that you're getting such close connections is because it really wasn't that long ago.
Well, yes, I just apprehensive of making a phone, sending out a message to people who were probably slave owners.
Well, there are going to be people who are wanting to reach out to you and they don't know how. So somebody has to be willing to do it. And one of the things I say, you know, I do these YouTube videos where I talk about how to reach out, how to connect, all things with respect. And I think when understanding, Megan Smolyanek has just the best saying, one of her quotes, and I'm not quoting it directly, but she says something to the effect that, you don't get to get credit for your ancestors' victories and the wonderful things they do, nor do you get to take the blame for the things that they've done. And so I always approach when I'm reaching out to people, even though sometimes people do feel some kind of way about it, I want them to know, first of all, at the end of the day, we're family. It didn't happen in a way that any of us would have wanted it to happen, but we are here now. So if you have information that you're willing to share, and please talk with me about it, share with me. And I'm telling you, I have made over the last 2-3 years some amazing connections, but I've also made some amazing friends. So much so that when I, tell people I'm going to be traveling to North Carolina, I've got one friend who she and I share a very difficult history that involves lynching. And she said to me, because she talked with me very respectfully, very honestly about this history, but we talk often now. And she says, Pamela, when you come, will you stay at my house? And I'm like, I can't do that now because there's COVID. But eventually we're going to get to that point. But open your heart, open your mind. Every response is not going to be a good one necessarily. But one of the things I found is that you do have to have thick skin, a lot of enthusiasm. And I just say that if the people in 1865 were willing to risk it all to find family, that I've got to have at least as much guts and just go ahead and do it. So I'm going to encourage you on this journey, and you'll have my contact information. Stay in touch with me. Let me know how it goes, and let me know if you might even need my help with helping you make some of those connections. I'll be happy to do that through the Big Family Search.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your encouragement.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions? As a matter of fact, I want to say I went on Roots Connect last night to watch a video, and one of my cousins that I discovered through the Big Family Search was doing a presentation. Her name is Janice Gilliard, and she was doing it in the among all the videos with the African American research, and I found her as a part of this process. Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you connect to your African roots? Were there records kept when people were stolen? Were they, how do you connect from, America to Africa?
Well, I don't have a lot of very specific information, but the thing that has been my saving grace has been family stories. So since a lot of our stories were not written, I have been able to, because my family, my mom and dad were telling me these stories and singing this music to me that I can remember since I was 5 years old. So I was singing Kumbaya when I was 5, right? And so in my research, I've been able to learn where different parts of the language come from, like the words that I shared with you earlier, the different countries in West Africa. And they are indeed what is now, the Congo, and some of the other places that I've shared that show up in my DNA. And the other thing that's really interesting for me is because I talk a lot, I now know that when my parents were saying that you talk too much, that it wasn't a bad thing, because my family has
Sorry, I
talked
wasn't
a
listening.
lot
Sorry.
within the Family Writers Project in their interviews. So believe it or not, a lot of them had heard stories from their grandparents who may have come directly from Africa, and they remember the places where their family has told them they come from. And so they're just different bits and pieces that I've been able to put together. And I can tell you that even finding family with some of the historical people that I'm related to, like
What are you pointing at?
I'm able to find
That.
that the stories connect exactly with the genealogy.
Oh, yeah, she shouldn't be wearing those.
No. Lady, good heavens.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you so much. Your presentation has been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else before I close out the breakout room?
I just am glad I have your contact information, because I would just love a time to talk with you and just tell you things that I was thinking about while you were talking. Very briefly, Jim Hauser, who also was asked to do about those books, and I are involved in a project called the Montgomery, Washington Project. And we're taking, I don't know if you're familiar with it, Carrie Ann Prince started it several years ago. So the gist of it is that in the 1910 census, if you look at everybody that were on those, 70% of them who were white are already on Family Search and have some trees started. But if you look at the African American population for the exact same time, only 4% are on. And so about 2 years ago, sorry, I'm choking up, Carrie Ann Prince thought that that was a shame and that we needed to fix that. So she started taking census records from 1900, 1910 and putting African American families back together. And that is the project that I'm currently working on. I'm obsessed with it. I love it. I feel like these people are talking to me and saying, put my history back together.
Yes.
I want my relatives to know about me. And the reason I'm crying is because after doing the work on Family Search, I've done many of these trees, and I get so involved. My name will show up on Family Search. I'm sure you're aware of that. And so their families will connect to me and say, are you my family? And I say, no, I'm involved in a project and I'm just obsessed with this work. But I've worked extensively on Campbell's and Atkinson's. So that's why I've just been sobbing. And I got a message from an Atkinson saying, can you help me find my family? And I kind of came to a dead end. And so I would like to talk to you further about that. The other thing that I wanted to say is, as I'm working on this, it's a giant spreadsheet of like 3,000 hints. But as I work on it, it seems to be that I'm always running into these lines where African Americans have tried to build their family trees themselves and they've submitted pictures. And so I can see that they're working on it. And for some reason, I always jump on those links, and I feel honored, and like it brings me to tears. I talked to Jim Hauser and I said, again, I'm finding pictures. These are people that are trying to put their trees together, and I'm just honored. I just love the work, and I just think you are beautiful, and like I just feel a spiritual connection with you, and I just love you. I don't even know you, and I just love you, and I just can't wait to talk to you further.
Well, I just love you right back, Catherine. And we are family. We are family. Like I said, this is our shared story. And I welcome people who can help, reunite these families. And thank you for the work that you're doing. It really is important. And what I will say to people is that, I've always known, that my family's history is so deeply rooted and grounded here in this country. But when you're able to put names and pictures with your family that's a part of this history, it is life changing. And so when I saw that picture of Laura Atkinson Campbell, and I saw so much of myself in that picture, wow. I mean, it was mind blowing, and it is hard work, and I even say that it's kingdom work. You were doing. I call you all my angels. So again, just thank you so much. I appreciate it, and the response that you're having is the appropriate response, because doing this work helps you to understand, and it restores the humanity of the people who have this experience. Who, sometimes when it's on the pages of a book, those experiences just fall flat. But these are people who had feelings and families, and there's just so much to tell. So thank you for your work.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a long family history, people who are farmers and planters, and I have been researching, all the way back to the 1600s. Here in this country. I actually know the names from documents of some people who were slaves. And I've often wondered, is there a place where you could put that information that people, for example, back in the mid 1840s, there was a branch of my family, and they had, there was a woman who was, in their family, and her name was Aunt Tab, I think it is. And she was born on a plantation, the Finn plantation in Alabama, and she died in Texas. Somebody might like to know that.
Absolutely. And I think maybe Family Search is doing some of that, but that's one of the things that we're trying to also create as a part of the larger project with the Big Family Search. But what I would also encourage you to do is are you on any of the genealogy groups that are online?
Yes, I'm on most of them.
Oh, okay, good. So you're going to have some African Americans who are a part of those groups who may be interested in knowing that information. But what I will do is, if you can definitely send me some contact information, I will find out what is readily available, but I will also keep you abreast of what we're doing to go ahead and get some of that information up. And I do have a website, which is thebigfamilysearch.com, and that part of document sharing is going to be coming soon. It's being developed. It's going to be coming soon. And again, it's just so that anybody who hears about me or hears about the project can just look to see what's available there.
Okay, yeah, I'm on Family Search. I could put something somewhere.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you have the information, get that put on Family Search, and if she's in Find a Grave, attach any records that you can.
Yeah, not in Find a Grave, but in the written, published family history of my family. She's named.
Well, you can scan that in and attach to her and create a record.
Okay.
Or if there are any death records, make sure you attach to her.
Yeah, I know that I don't know. I'm fairly sure she died in 1846. She's buried in the family cemetery.
Oh, wow.
In Beardstown, Texas. And the grave is unmarked. And unless you're a family member and have read this book, you wouldn't know.
That would be fantastic, because I've been able to find a lot of a family, because just reading through family histories, like I go to some of the family history libraries in the various different states, and that's very vital information. That, along with the state records, wills, those kinds of things are very helpful. So that would be amazing if you would do that.
Okay. I'll take it on.
Awesome. Any other questions?
I had a question. This Information Wanted documentary film, is there a way to access that?
Well, right now it's just the trailer, but you can, I have the Big Family Search on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. You can download it from there.
Oh,
Or you can go to my website, which is bigfamilysearch.com, and I have it available there as well. So
thank you.
please do share it as much as you can share about what it is that I'm doing. You know, if anybody wants to be in touch with me, all the contact information is there. And so I'm just excited to be able to show it. And like I said, we're going to be continuing the filming that we had to stop doing because of COVID. And hopefully they'll be able to debut the entire film before the end of this year. Thank you. Is there anything else? Well, you all have been amazing. You've been amazing. It's been so nice to talk to you. And of course, you can already tell I love talking about this.
We love listening to you.
Oh, thank you. This is so important. And so I do appreciate being a part of this. And this is nice to talk to my big family in Texas. And I'm sure that I'm going to get to bump into you all and see you all in different places and spaces. But like I said, you can always just be in touch with me. If you've got any good information that you want to share or pick my brain about something, just let me know.
Okay.
So I guess I need to come out of the break room. And I think they said that we'll be done from this point. But so again, like I said, it's up to the Texas delegation. If they want to have me back for another chat or whatever, I am certainly open to doing that. But thank you all so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Can I share one last story with you?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I mentioned that when I'm working on this Montgomery, Washington project, and those are counties, and that's where we're taking the censuses from, that I often run across pictures. One day I came across a picture that just blew my mind. It was so beautiful, and I had to know the story of it. There were about 23 individuals in it. And then I found that there was a link to a book, and the book is called From Slave to Statesman, the story of Joshua Houston. Are you familiar with that book?
I'm not.
So I immediately had to go to a library and get it. And of course we were, in the pandemic, and just these amazing miracles allowed me to get it that day. And of course I ordered it from Amazon because I wanted it, and I just devoured it in like a day. I just did nothing else. I did no housework, nothing. I'm a mom of 4 boys, 3 of them are still at home, and I just was devouring this book. It was full of a lot of other pictures, and I thought, well, I'm going to put these pictures on Family Search, and I'm going to give all the credit to this book. This book is available online as well, but who wants to read a book online? You want to hold it in your hands. So I uploaded all the pictures in there that I could, and including that one picture of the 23 individuals, which is a fascinating story. I gave each one of them, and I tried to do all of their family connections on Family Search as much as I could. And then a couple weeks go by, and I get a message from one of the men that I put a picture of. His last name is Hightower, and he wrote me and he said, "Are we family? Where did you get this picture of my great-grandfather?" I knew his name, and I've never seen a picture of him until now.
Wow.
This is the first picture I've ever seen. Where did you get it? And how are we related? And so, of course, I wrote him back and told him about the project that I'm involved in. And now I just want to go to this city where Joshua Houston was. I think it's called Huntsville. It's north of Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just an incredible individual, and he built his sons, and he built all these houses and buildings, and they're still there. And I that's a dream of mine. I just want to get out there. But I recommend that book to you. It's called From Slave to Statesman, the story of Joshua Houston. So he was the personal slave of Sam Houston, but he originally was owned by his wife, but he became like the right-hand man to Sam Houston. And Sam Houston was a very interesting slave owner, that he wanted his slaves, when they weren't working for him, when they on their downtime, he wanted them to go pursue jobs and keep the money. And so he worked as a wheelwright. He was a very talented, very smart individual, and he worked as a wheelwright and all kinds of things. And so when Sam Houston heard that freedom was coming, he had a meeting with all the slaves and says, he was in, he wrote to the president and knew that this was coming. And so he had a meeting with his slaves before it even happened and said, I hear this is coming and you're all free. He did it before it even was like, you know, necessary. And so this book talks about, you know, how hard it was to begin life, but Joshua Houston had so many skills that he was just prolific and very successful. And a lot of the people in this book were landowners very quickly. And I'm just dying to get to Huntsville and just see all the history. I just can't wait. It's a dream of mine.
That's amazing. And I will share with you a couple of things. First of all, Hightower is one of the names that I found out through the search that I'm attached to. My family's attached
Are you
to.
really? Are
Yeah.
you really? Okay, I'm just dying.
And the gentleman that I met here in Dallas at the lecture, his family are the Montgomerys. So there's a very good chance there's some attachment to Montgomery County, and his family are very, very wealthy people. And so there could be some attachment to that as well. But the story, I've written down the book, it's an amazing story. And believe it or not, there were similar stories all across the country. So I do have people in my family. There's one ancestor in particular, his name was Irvin James. And Irvin, and again, his family incredibly skilled. They were great hunters. They did iron work. They did lots of different things. And they also were allowed by Kathy James, who was the slaveholder back in South Carolina, to also keep some of their funds, so that by 1870, he actually had enough money to buy 105 acres of land. And then the rest of the family went in with him and bought another 105 acres of land, and they named it Jamestown. And until 1950, about 250 members of the James family in Florence County, South Carolina, a community called Mars Bluff, lived in this very insulated community. And the only time they ever had to leave was to go to the doctor or to go to the post office. And they were so organized as a community that they also had their own insurance plan, so that everybody would, when they would sell their crops or sell their, you know, furs or whatever it was that they were doing, they would put a portion of the funds into the insurance funds. And so when anybody had to go leave the property, because of course there were a lot of women like my great-great-grandmother, Priscilla Grant, who lived also in this community. They did some, you know, very naturalistic healing, but when they had to go see a medical doctor, they would pull from this insurance fund that the family established to pay for the medical bills. But this community is still held in family trust, and it now has a historical marker. And again, it was because this family was able to hold on to some of the money that they made and continue to save both before and after emancipation. And so the family is hoping to develop this into a historical site, again, in Florence, South Carolina, and the community is Jamestown. And again, so these kinds of stories I'm finding all over the country. So if that's it, we're going to conclude. Can you all hear me still?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to give it the last college try, because I found something that said it would allow me to share my screen. So I am just going to end on this note, if I can, by pulling up the documentary trailer. So if you'll bear with me for just a second. And you can tell me if you can hear it. Can you hear that now? Okay.
Yes.
Can you see it on the screen? Okay.
Black people have always been central
It
to
looks like
American
I'm
history.
Hold one second.
I was never taught
I'm going to go
much of
back to the
anything
presentation,
about
see if I can show
the
it to you.
contribution.
Okay, let me just go back to the presentation. we're gonna get this. We're gonna make this happen today.
Mhm.
Let's see. It says that I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, but it's
Can
on
you
your
all-
There it is.
Can you see it?
Mhm.
Okay. Let me just take it back to the beginning here. Can you hear that still?
Black people have always been central to American history. I was never taught much of anything about the contributions of Black people in this country or even slavery history. In 2017, I took a DNA test and I realized that I've got thousands and thousands of people that I'm related to through DNA, and I barely knew any of those people. I started doing the research and reaching out to scholars and finding out more about forced migration of American-born enslaved people during the antebellum era here in the US. These families were separated and were never brought back together. There are people who are walking around who have no idea how they are connected to each other or to this history. I decided that I wanted to find my family that had been separated by slavery. The DNA is bearing out the fact that we are very much connected.
There's a moment of truth. I'm gonna walk in and I'm gonna be meeting my family for the first time. Hey, darling, how you doing? You all look like family.
The white part is part of her wedding.
And it's amazing.
Yeah.
Phyllis's great-great-great-grandmother was enslaved by the same slaveholders who had enslaved my family, and she was indeed my family. And it's the first time in over 150 years that her branch of the family had been reunited with my branch of the family. The descendants of slaveholders and the descendants of enslaved people, for the most part, are the same families. If I find those families, I will inevitably find my family. Our lives are so intricately woven together by blood and by experience. You were telling me that you had some family in South Carolina, and you asked me if I'd ever heard of the place. And you said, have you ever heard of this place called Clarendon County?
Yeah.
I said, not only have I heard of it, like half my DNA comes from Clarendon County, South Carolina.
My family were significant slave holders. There's not a nicer word. I despise it, but that's our history.
Just as I've discovered that I have white family who are Montgomery and McFadden, you've had an opportunity to have your DNA done. And are you finding that you have Black members of your family as well?
The DNA mix is coupled with a ancestry DNA from northwestern Africa, from Guinea, Nigeria, those areas.
I think it's pretty amazing, and it is commendable that it hasn't been hidden in your family since you became aware of it.
It's the truth to start with.
Right.
I believe the truth's important, period. But also as a just fundamental part of being a human being, how connected we all are.
We have to come to a meeting of the minds where we're willing to tell the truth in this country about what has happened and what continues to happen as a result of the legacy of slavery in the U.S. It has totally redefined how I see myself and my family's contribution to this country. My dad used to say to me, this country was built on the backs of your family, and it absolutely was. There's so many African-American families that have come through this legacy. I want them to be able to duplicate the things that I'm doing. And for the first time, thanks to DNA, thanks to genealogy research and social media, we are finding each other again.
Now, y'all don't cry. This is good news.
That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
That
Thank
was
you.
so beautiful.
Thank you. So, like I said, I just
Hi, my name is
appreciate-
Pamela Bailey,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry. Hold on. I just want to say how much I just appreciate you all being with me today and taking this time with me. And I hope that we'll get an opportunity to meet each other again.
Okay.
All right. Have a good day.
One
Oh, go
one
ahead.
last thing. I would love to know the name of your Hightower relative, that someone that has already passed away, so I can look in Family Search and just have fun right now. And then I would love to know the name of one of your relatives to see if you and I are related, because that would completely rock my world.
Okay.
In
Can you do
Family
this?
Search.
Can you do this for me? If you've got my contact information, can you send me your information? And I would have to do it later this evening, but I will be more than happy to connect.
Okay.
To see if there is a possibility that we're family. And then I will have to go into some of the Hightower family trees to see who some of those people are.
Yes, and I would love to look at your Campbells and your Atkinsons and everything. I would just love to look at that. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. You're so welcome. Thank you, everybody. You all have a super day.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm the creator of the Big Family Search Project.